us. This is like a really exciting moment for the Temple News and our paper. For those who don't know, last night we printed our 100th anniversary edition of the Temple News. It was our special issue last night. Some of our fellow staff members are here and obviously helped produce it last night, so thank you for that. But yeah, welcome to our first Centennial Speaker Series. It's really exciting to be able to celebrate the paper, its rich history, and everyone who's contributed to it along the years. I'm happy and beyond glad to be joined by Ellie Fisher, Richard Leiby, and Irv Randolph, who offered to speak to us today and talk about their time at the paper. So yeah, before we get started, as I said, just let me know if I cut off at any time or if any of the speakers cuts off at any time. But before we get deep into it, I guess I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. So yeah, I guess we can start with you, Irv.
Hi, okay, my name is Irv Randolph. I'm the managing editor of the Philadelphia Tribune. I've been here for quite a few years now. Before being an editor, I was a reporter for a couple of Gannett newspapers, and I was at Temple in the late 70s, early 80s, and at the Temple News during that time. Happy to elaborate more, but that's a abbreviated version of my story.
Cool. And you, Richard?
So I'm Rich Leiby, and I've been at the Washington Post now for 30 years. Hard to believe. I was at Temple in the late 70s, though it seems only like the late 1970s. It was the 1970s. Anyway, I have worked at a couple of newspapers around the country in Florida and Minnesota. And right now I'm an articles editor on the Sunday magazine. And I've been a foreign correspondent. I've covered, I like to say, 2.5 wars: Afghanistan, Iraq, and the insurgency in Pakistan.
Cool. Thank you, Richard. And you, Ellie?
I am currently I write books, but I want to say retired as a journalist, but I don't think you ever really retire as a journalist. I spent most of my professional career at United Press International, first as a reporter in Philadelphia, and then as an editor. I did kind of a circuitous route at one point once my family was established, and also got a degree in landscape design and found myself putting out a magazine for landscape designers. Because as you know, once this is in your blood, you don't ever, it never leaves. So.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all so much. And I guess just for context, along with this panel discussion we have today, we have another one at the end of the week on Friday. So stay tuned for that as well. But I guess I just want to jump into some questions, I guess, for all of you now that you've introduced yourselves. Obviously journalism has changed a lot, not just in your careers, but especially for me personally, seeing it, I guess, in the last 5 to 10 years or so. I guess, what would be the thing that you say has changed the most since you first stepped onto the scene, whenever your career started, let's say post-Temple? Any one of you, feel free to jump in.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest change has been the internet has had a profound change in what we do, how we cover the news, our ability to cover the news. I mean, it's had a tremendous impact on both on the news gathering side as well as the revenue side, both good and bad. On bad, obviously has been how it's impacted in terms of our revenue and the impact it has had on some papers, some who have gone by the wayside. The good is that we're able to provide more coverage than ever before, and able to do it in more creative ways than ever before. I mean, that's been to me, I would say that's been the biggest impact. One thing I did neglect to say in terms of my intro, I've been a reporter, editor, and also I founded a paper in South Jersey about now 11 years ago. So I've kind of been through reporting, editor, and publisher, so the whole gamut. And so I've had to deal with the change in terms of the internet and how it's impacted on, what we do.
And I would say the key to becoming a really good journalist is the ability to be objective and to cover stories with objectivity. I think that has become, it's not that it's become more difficult for the journalist, but it's become more difficult for the perception of the journalist. And unfortunately, that, as we all know, that has a tremendous impact on how people view what they get from the news. I find that unfortunate. Obviously, I know we all do. There was a time, even before my time, of yellow journalism and sensationalism, which wasn't necessarily alternate facts or lies, but an embellishment, an effort to make the news more exciting, sexier, and to attract more attention. Now the assumption is that if you don't agree, it's fake news, as we all know. So I think it is harder to be a good journalist these days, but I think it's obviously more important than ever.
Well, I would second what Irv and Ellie have to say, and just add that I think our ethics and our fact-checking standards have slid in light of the need for speed to get the story up, to match the story, to update the story. And we're not ignoring facts, but we're too loose with the facts, I believe, sometimes. And when we screw up, we validate the critics who believe that what we do is fake. So we have to be especially cautious about that.
Okay, I guess like shifting gears, or I guess diving deeper into that, I guess what would you say is the solution to that? How do we find a way to make sense of the fact that there's so many different voices, and the fact that facts are often presented in different ways now than previously with different forms of media?
Let's unplug the internet.
And take away cell phones.
We're not going to change
Right.
the public's need for instantly updated news. And I think we're in a real quagmire right now. And what Ellie pointed out is really the case, where if you're not on the side that the paper's on, you don't believe what the paper's saying. And it's very tough to convince people to come over to just a bipartisan understanding of news. So I don't have an answer, but it's a challenge that the journalists of tomorrow should take on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we have to have tougher skins than we've ever had to have before, because we're under a lot more criticism than I know when I first got into the business. I mean, you would get challenged by whoever you were covering or whatever, but not by on a national level as much, and kind of and chastise the challenge. You're not being a propagandist, so it's but we have to stick to, I think, as long as we are reporting fairly and objectively, and point out what is there, something, it's not up, something that does not up to interpretation. These are facts, and I don't think we should be afraid to state what the facts are. And we're beginning to do more and more of that, fact checking in real time. We have institutions that do that, but more and more papers are also taking on that responsibility of fact checking and stating the facts. And I think even if some people may not like it, I think they will respect us for it. So even if you both and I think that as long as we're respected because we're and seen as something as a vehicle that's trustworthy, that's the main thing. So not being afraid to point out the facts in real time sometimes, and or or later. That has to be done, I think, even more so than even before.
And I also, again, referring back to that period of time of yellow journalism and all, I mean, there was a long period of time where reporters, always referred to as newspapermen, I might add, were not respected. Most of them, I don't know if most is correct, but certainly many did not have college degrees. The whole stereotype of the cigarette smoking and crude and pushy reporter. And thank goodness for Watergate and those two little DC crime reporters who helped change the image of journalists back in the early 70s. So I agree with Irv. I think we just have to, it's not an easy time, but it hasn't been an easy time at other periods. And
Right.
We still need facts. We still need honesty. We still need truth. And I do believe if the young journalists of today stick with it, we will all be rewarded in the end. So.
Yeah, Irv, you said something that was pretty interesting about having like tougher skin to, I guess, report the challenges that are currently facing society or whatever a journalist may encounter. I guess have there been instances where any of you felt that what you were covering at the time weighed on you personally to where you kind of had to develop thick skin?
I can go with that one. My first beat out of college was covering the Church of Scientology, which, if anybody knows the reputation of Scientologists, it's their attack first, denigrate, have harassed with private eyes, and then sue. So that was an interesting beat. I covered it because I was in a little beach town in Florida where they had established an international headquarters. So I had to really develop a thick skin because they were after me all the time. And I wanted to stay objective. I didn't want to characterize them necessarily as a cult. Although now I call them a fascist UFO worshiping militaristic cult. So that's my view after many years. So that's one time I had to develop a thick skin.
And I would say for me, it was covering stories as a female, particularly politics. As a UPI reporter, we were responsible for every election, and all the newspapers and television and radio waited for the UPI or AP to announce who had won what election, whether it was local or federal. And having to get these good stories, you had to find ways to sneak into the hotel rooms and go to the places where you knew the candidate and his staff was waiting for the results. And you got labeled and you got discredited by the mere fact that you were a female reporter. But you were doing the same job your male colleagues were doing. And it was difficult. I mean, in the sense that you sort of sucked it up so that you wouldn't have to not get the story because of your gender.
Well, I can, I'm sorry, were you done? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I can relate to two instances. One, when I first began as a reporter, I'm 22 years old, something like that. And I was working for a small newspaper in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And I was covering the first, I don't think it was the first, but they reacted as if it was the first, but there was an adult bookstore being built in this town, or outside this town. And there was a movement to try to keep the bookstore from being built, from opening, and then they try to close it. And they brought this speaker in who was, speaking about pornography and all that. And the area was conservative rural community, and they had this big movement, about trying to shut it down. And I was just reporting what was going on. And the speaker that they brought in from out of town, he, because I was just reporting again what was happening, in this large audience, he said, "We have a reporter here. He's who think he's Woodward and Bernstein put together." He singled me out, called me out in this large audience, right? And everybody started looking at me, And then at night, people started calling my home. And they were calling my, I don't know how they got, and they started calling my home, and they were saying, some would say, "God bless you," but they said it, and I didn't really take it as, as kindly as they were saying, because it seemed like it was a kind of the way they were saying it, and was kind of an undertone there. And so just by, reporting something that a lot of folks just didn't want to hear the other side of it, because I would talk to the guy who was being the business owner, and I would talk to the people who were against it. And it was a thing where, again, there were some, kind of like subtle threats, and a lot of criticism. So then fast forward, I was covering the move bombing in Philadelphia. And again, being objective, covering all sides, there was criticism from the members themselves, move members, from the Mayor Good, the developer who was tasked to rebuild the homes, attacked me personally on a couple of occasions, and I got the kind of the thing also that, being a Black reporter and he's a Black developer, and why am I writing these negative stories, and all this kind of thing. And so me early on, and I still was relatively young at that point to do that, and to deal with that. And so early on, you realize that as long as you have your facts right, and you're fair, that you have to be able to weather the storm that will come for covering anything that's seen as controversial, and that's really people near and dear to people's hearts.
Yeah, awesome. I like the thick skin and the, I guess, embracing the idea of being, I guess, tough towards whatever opposition people throw at you in terms of your reporting. I guess, Rich, something that I guess I'm familiar with, and I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with, is your reporting with Watergate. I guess, how would you say that affected you personally? And I guess, how did you grow from it, and how did it shape your career?
Well, it's not true that I reported on Watergate. I'm a little bit too young for that. However,
Well, I mean, yeah,
I grew, I grew up
yeah.
in the Watergate era.
Yeah,
So, and got into reporting, I think, because of this
yeah,
headline.
yeah,
So when Woodward and Bernstein were doing their thing, I was a young man, young teenager, as a matter of fact. But boy, it sure seemed glamorous that you could become not yet a cinematic star, but a hero.
Right.
And I decided then that I wanted to be one of those guys, not realizing that it takes a little bit more than just a desire. You have to really pay your dues. You have to put in a lot of work. And it took me about almost 15 years to reach the post of working in the trenches and being interviewed by Ben Bradley, the editor of the paper at the time. And eventually I would work with Woodward, which was a major sort of development in my career, because he taught me things that, even though I'd been in the business a long time, he knew so many things. So how did that affect when I became the editor of the Temple News? Well, we were crusading journalists. We were after investigative stories. We wanted to investigate Temple Hospital. We investigated poverty in the neighborhood. We investigated whatever seemed a murderer who was found on campus, enrolled on campus. And these things were, we thought, investigative stories. We were like the Washington Post. Of course, we also had a marijuana columnist, which I'd say at this point would be considered pretty prescient. And in fact, I'm going to argue at some point that the Washington Post hire a marijuana columnist because it's such a big story. But that's another matter. We were scrappy. We were, and probably we were making mistakes. Howie Shapiro is probably here, and he can attest to that. That's why you're in college, to make mistakes to a certain degree. Does that answer the question? Give you a sense of-
Yeah, I guess more so, what would you say that you took away personally from, I guess, the investigative work that you did at the Temple News, and I guess how did that affect, I guess, the staffs that came after you?
Well, bear in mind that I glided right into this Scientology beat. And here was a conspiratorial, secretive, denunciatory organization, a lot like the Nixon White House, quite frankly. And I got my experience there too. But as far as how it affected the Temple News, I think that every generation at the News built on, their own experiences. And I hope we gave because you also have carryover staff, so that those editors after me would have picked up the torch to a certain degree. And I think they did.
Yeah, I guess, what would you say was your fondest memory at the paper?
Knowing the marijuana columnist. No, I mean,
That was a big deal in the 70s.
it was a big deal. Okay, the dark room was the place to be. And I think that's, again, when you're in college, that's the time to do that stuff. But my fondest memory was when the three major newspapers in Philadelphia went on strike, and the Temple News decided to ramp up its coverage of the city and became a citywide newspaper, delivered citywide. Now, you could argue that was union busting, and that was not exactly the best way to approach a strike situation. But we were young, and we felt like, let's put our newspaper out there. As a matter of fact, Ellie, we sort of filled it with UPI copy to cover international and national news, because not many people would want to read about Temple exclusively. So that was a fond memory, and that was something that I don't think was ever done before and will ever be done again.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess based on that experience and I guess the challenges that came with that reporting, what advice would you have for, I guess, staff members like me or any other staff members on the call right now or going forward?
What kind of advice would I have?
Yeah.
Be as, I'll give you a piece of advice Bob Woodward gave me when I was working on a tough story. He said, when you feel bogged down on a story, make 2 aggressive moves every day. Meaning, should I pick up the phone? Should I go knock on the door? How am I going to get this piece of information? Well, figure it out and do it. And that's particularly true of investigative reporting. You have to really push and push. As far as regular day in and day out reporting, keep up your spirits and keep up your energy to continue on. Like you worked until 3:45 last night. And I can tell you that there were nights at the Temple News that we were working at 3:45 in the morning just to get the paper to bed.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that.
Can I add to that?
Yeah,
I
go
think,
for it.
yeah, I would say doing a variety of stories while you're and that way you kind of discovering the things that you really are interested in, and that's what you may be best at. So even though you may have an interest in sports, do something else besides that. If you entertainment, do something else besides that, or news, do something else besides that. I mean, I think the thing that benefited me the most when I was in school was that I was kind of all over the place. I covered, I started off covering mainly kind of cultural things, and then I from both on and off campus, and then I went to other campus news and other type of stories, and the variety, having a diverse experience as opposed to kind of just limiting yourself to one particular type of reporting or one type of story, because you don't know. You might find out there's something else that you're more that you can do very well, and also then when you have your first job, you don't know what that may be, and so if you can do more than, if you have the ability to show the ability to cover more than one thing, that definitely helps you as opposed to being kind of narrow in only one area.
Yeah. Irv, I guess going back to, what would you say is the most challenging thing you reported on while a member of the Philadelphia Tribune related to the city of Philadelphia?
Reporting on or as an editor?
Yeah, or both.
Okay. Well, I think, one of the most challenging things is what's going on right now in terms of the city. The city has experienced, as you all know, if you're following news and what's happening in the city, a serious issue of gun violence that's not only a problem that's happening locally, but it's actually a national problem. And covering that issue, because you're talking about taking, in many cases, young lives, and covering that issue is I think is extremely important. It's a challenging issue because how do you get it right in terms of not repeating the mistakes that were made before in terms of mass incarceration, and at the same time solving the problem of gun violence. And that's all tied into the other issue of poverty in this city, the high level of poverty that you have. So you have a city that's thriving in many ways, is downtown and educational institutions, Temple, Penn, etc. But at the same time, you have a very poor, I would say poor K-12 system. And so kind of reporting on that contrast, that contradictions within the city, and which is not a new problem, trying to, because there's a lot of good things that's happening. At the same time, there's a lot of things that are not so good, and you have to strike a balance between in terms of covering both. So, just really, there's a lot of things in the past, but really just the what is going on right now in this city, the vast disparity and differences that exist within the city.
Yeah, and I guess going off of issues like gun violence that are plaguing the city right now, I guess how would you say specifically that the Philadelphia Tribune has worked to hold city officials accountable?
Well, in August we did a 4-part series on that issue, and we looked at it from the problem itself, what are city officials doing about it, and we took an in-depth look at what were the how are city officials managing or responding to the issue. And so we reported on that, and also we had, and then we editorialized on it. So, and on the side of opinion, we really took the city official, all of them, whether it's the mayor, the DA, the police commissioner, to task, and that they were not doing, obviously, what they were not doing enough, or what they were doing is obviously not being effective because the problem is not being abated, right? So we and that's what we try to do. We try to, point out issues in a more in-depth, in a contextual way. And then, of course, we want to hold folks accountable in terms of on the editorial side, and also staying with it, not having it as a kind of a fly-by-night story. I think by just constantly staying on top of it, and so that it's just not a story of the day or story of the week. Is not something, and I think that's how you hold those in power accountable, by staying on top of it, continue to ask them hard questions, and not letting it go, not being fickle in terms of or easily distracted on issues that are very serious.
Yeah, and I guess how did the Temple News shape, I guess, that willingness to pursue coverage like that, and how to tackle it specifically?
In terms of accountability, actually, I came to the paper. I started writing for the paper, and I at that time I was able to do something that was kind of, I don't know if you're able to do this now, but I was actually working on that. I worked on the advertising end as well as on the reporting end, and I was able to somehow balance that. But in terms of reporting, how I started to write for the paper was that there was an incident that happened, a racial incident in which there was a cartoon that was seen to be offensive regarding Black women. And I can't recall all the details of it, but I think the word bitch was in the cartoon or something like that. And anyway, there was a protest that happened that former Temple professor, I'm assuming she's former Temple professor, Sonia Sanchez. I don't think she's still there now, Miss Sanchez. And she led a protest at the Temple News. And so it's like, okay, this is offensive, this is racially offensive, we can't have this. And that led to, with the students, okay, how do we handle this? And one of the things I decided to do was to be a part of the solution from the inside out. And after that, I then went to start reporting on the news, writing for the paper. And so something that started off as a kind of a very horrible, negative incident and turned into something positive. And so from the very beginning of my experience was that of being that was a tough thing to do as a student, to be involved in terms of protests. And then there was a meeting, I remember afterwards, with then President Walkman, and so that was tough in terms of being able to speaking out, because there was a need to speak out. So from the very beginning, you had to receive something that was wrong, then you speak out about it, and then you hopefully in this particular case also become part of the solution. And then then on the other side of that, my wife also started writing for the paper, so then became the fond memory is that also met my wife were working for the paper. So it started from something very controversial and negative to a more of a positive experience by covering different things for at the paper, and to meet my future wife.
Awesome. Yeah, Ellie, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, what the Temple News was like during your time there. I guess some of the war protests that you covered during your time there. I guess, what was the general feel, like the general atmosphere of the newsroom during that tense time that you guys were reporting in?
So when I started in 1969 on the Temple News, I was that naive suburban kid. And then in a few months, Kent State happened, and 4 college kids were killed by the National Guard during an anti-war protest. And it changed everyone. I think it fundamentally changed the average American's view about war, patriotism, the government, and so forth. It certainly changed me. And I would say you would be hard pressed to find a college newspaper editor in the late 60s, early 70s who wasn't impacted by Vietnam and the anti-war movement. In fact, the lottery, which maybe some of the younger people on this Zoom are not aware of, the Vietnam was the last war we drafted for. And it was not popular, and nobody wanted to be drafted and sent to a war they didn't want to go to. So a lottery system was started, and it was based on your birth date. And it was random, and your birth date was assigned a number. And if you were below, I would say roughly 150, you worried. If you were above it, you breathed the sign of relief. Well, that lottery came out in December of my freshman year at Temple. And I was on the Temple News with a number of seniors, and we all gathered in the editor-in-chief's cubicle office and listened to the radio as their numbers were called. And most of them, one by one, they breathed a sign of relief when their number was high, but there was one guy on the Temple News, one of the editors, whose number was low. And we knew he'd be drafted, and we were heartbroken. It continued throughout our time at Temple because student protests, anti-war demonstrations were part of college. It wasn't just something we were covering in Philly, although we did go and cover it in Philly or Washington, DC, but it was happening on campus all the time. And here you were sent as a reporter. We were all feeling very much aligned with the student protesters, but we were also trying to be these objective reporters. That didn't work out that great, but the government knew that it was losing its public relations with college kids. So they came up with a great idea that if they could have college newspaper editors spend some time in the Army with ROTC students, then maybe they would be able to bridge this gap, because at this point, college students saw the Army as the enemy, because the National Guard was who was sent on our campuses and tear gassed and so forth during these demonstrations. So I was chosen as one of the editors in chief of a college newspaper, the only female. Spent a week in the Army. It was, I didn't live in the barracks with the guys, so I was given in the officers' quarters, which was not much different from my dorm room at Hardwick Hall, which I know still exists. And I spent the week otherwise doing everything with these soldiers. I did the Slide for Life. I went on nighttime reconnaissance missions. I got in the helicopter. I got in the Chinook. I ate sea rations. And it was so interesting because these guys were my age. And many of them were in college. They were just doing ROTC, which was paying for their college. But they were my contemporaries, and they had my back during this week. And it was very effective, I must say. I came back and wrote some way too long piece for the Temple News, which you could do when you were the editor. It went on for pages about this week's experience. And it did it never stopped me from being an anti-war activist, but it did improve relations and the way we covered other people who were not necessarily part of the anti-war movement. So it's, when I think of my college experience, I started when, Temple was still fraternities and sororities and pep rallies. And literally overnight in 1969, that changed. And so my time, I want to say my college time was pretty heavy in a way. I remember somebody went on, would have been, I guess, Johnny Carson would have been the late night talk show guy back then. And the person was saying, I really feel bad for the kids in college these days because everything is so serious. And when I think of my college time, that's exactly what it was. I wouldn't trade it for a minute. My time in the Temple News and that experience completely shaped me as the adult I am today. So, but it was not your normal college experience. And the other thing, when I started in 1969, the journalism school was very small. There were not a lot of us. And then 1972, and all the President's Men came out, and suddenly the journalism department exploded. But like Rich was saying, a lot of people went into it because they thought, wow, this is a way to get famous, but they didn't stay. Because to be a journalist is a lot of work, and you really have to be dedicated to it to do well. But it was interesting. All of a sudden you went on the Temple News one day and there's all these new faces. Like, where did they come from? And within a month they were all gone, except for maybe one or two that stuck in the field.
I guess like looking back like long over your career, I guess how would you say the acceptance of women in the journalism field has changed since you first came on?
Wow. So, I entered a field that was predominantly male, but not all male, but predominantly so. UPI, there was one other woman in the Philadelphia Bureau beside myself, who to this day is a very close friend of mine. And we were made to feel not part of the club, so to speak. There were many Me Too movements, many Me Too instances, including one that resulted in my being denied a promotion at UPI. We know where to turn. All my superiors were male. There was no HR department. You had to move away, move out of that situation, stay away from that person, accept the fact you didn't get that job you wanted. So that was hard. I'm grateful today for the Me Too movement. I don't know that it's gotten easier for women. I think we are more open about it. Thank goodness. I think there's more avenues to that you can take to combat it. And I am encouraged by the fact that women will support other women, and that you think of some of these top journalists today, these courageous women, and I'm like, my heart goes out to them. I had one who worked for me at UPI, Marie Colvin. Some of you may know her name. She was a very well-known war correspondent. You may remember her. She had lost an eye in one incident, and she wore a patch over her eye. And she was killed with a bombing when she was covering in a war zone. And I think about her, it's been many years now, but I think about her constantly when I at that point was an editor for UPI, and she came to me for a job. And I just knew that this was this extraordinary 22-year-old woman. And then she went on to be an extraordinary journalist. But it is better, I want to say, for women today, only because it's out in the open. But it's all professions make it a little harder to be female, and shouldn't be the case. And I'm happy to see when I attend some of these Temple News functions, how many of the journalism students at Temple are female. That's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellie. And I guess now I want to open it up for questions, if any of our guests have any for the panelists. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and ask whatever you like.
Hey, I had a quick question. A few of the panelists mentioned the importance of objectivity. So I'm hoping to hear from maybe from those folks who said that, how they define objectivity and if or how that's changed over time. Thanks.
I would say objectivity is you approach a story. There's no way you don't have a personal feeling. We're human beings, but you approach a story recognizing that you don't choose the outcome of it. It is based on the facts, and you might not be happy with the outcome. It's probably sort of easy for me to say as a former wire service reporter, because we really were trained to just, who, what, when, where, why, very little color. And so we essentially were sort of trained to be very factual, yet it's the only way to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, reporting the facts, not putting your, interjecting your opinion into the story. In terms of, I don't think objectivity has changed. Objectivity is, it is what it is, but what has changed is maybe the some approach to writing, reporting. I'm saying writing more so than reporting has been to interject their opinion in, more into the story. You see that more often where there's more editorializing, and I think that's dangerous. I think our editor, when we write opinion, that it needs to be stronger than ever before. No holds barred and strong opinion, and not mealy mouth, but very strong. So when opinion is being offered, it should be clearly labeled and stated, and everyone knows this is opinion being stated now. But when it's reporting, keep the editorializing your personal opinion out of it, and how things have changed in some ways in terms of journalism is that there's a little bit more of editorializing seeping in, and I think that's dangerous.
I'll just note that the Post has started to use what's called transparency labeling, so that every story, and you do this within the content system, has to be labeled. Is it news? Is it perspective? Is it opinion? Is it a feature? And I think that's because so much opinion journalism has bled over into coverage. And I think there are two types of reporters. One is a reporter who says, look at this thing I'm reporting on. The other is the one who says, look at me. And the look at me reporters, I think, have gotten a lot of elevation these days.
Thanks for those answers.
Any other questions?
I'll ask a question here. Let me turn on my camera. So you all, as student journalists, covered some very big topics that were getting national, citywide coverage as well. So I guess, what is your perspective or thoughts on how student press can kind of enhance that national or citywide coverage on these really big topics like war protests, or right now, like COVID-19?
I could take that if nobody else is. At the Temple News, we covered the presidential campaign of 1976. I got to meet Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. We had no qualms about inserting ourselves into major stories. And I would say now, a student perspective on COVID would be very welcome. You could do the story of, of campus quarantining campus reactions. National stories provide great opportunities for student journalists to take a story and run with it. Just put it through your own prism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree with Rich. I
Okay.
don't think there is a single national story that in some capacity would not be fitting the Temple News. And I would hope that that is something that the Temple News does and will continue to do. It's important for the students to get a student perspective on what is happening in the real world. Like we're all inundated with news. Fortunately, I mean, I'm sitting here, my phone's been going off. Some New York Times, something. But it's an opportunity. You have this audience. It's an opportunity to reach them that the rest of us don't have. And so I think it would be valuable for the Temple News to approach every national story in some way.
I agree. I can't really think of any issue. Sure, there are some that would not directly impact students, and their lives. Students are students, but they're also, of course, they're citizens of the world, right? So, and citizens of this country. So it's like whatever is happening in terms of on the national level, there are opinions about that. There's ways that it impacts either directly or indirectly on students, and getting that perspective, I think is key. There are a number of students waiting to be asked what their thoughts are on certain things, and look at the just happened in terms of the with the Haitian immigration migrant issue. I'm sure there's some, of course, they're not limited to this, obviously, but they're Haitian students on campus. How's that? What do they feel about that, and how it impacts people in their family? It's just the COVID, of course, that's impacting the student and going to class, remote learning, and all that, as well as their parents and their work, whatever part-time jobs they may have. I can't really. It's difficult to think of any issues that are out there that are not students would have interest in, and that not being impacted by in some way.
Thank you.
Anything else? See, we're a little short on time, but
I have a
Um,
question.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just had a
You
question.
go.
Oh, thank you. I just had a question because knowing a little bit about history wise, being in a time with Walter Cronkite and different broadcast representatives of the news, who they admittedly did not have trust in their government, trust in the system. So as a journalist, how do you as representatives, how do you deal with that situation where people that you look up to say these things, Let me rephrase.
Could you
You're
repeat
saying
the last
Walter
part of the question? I
Cronkite?
didn't really.
Yeah,
Okay, so
I wasn't
no,
sure.
no, so Walter Cronkite during the Vietnam War times, right? He was saying certain things about the government, and basically there was this distrust, almost a disconnect between the people and who's at the head. So, and also we looking at today's time. Sorry if I'm unclear. I'm outside as well. Looking at today's time, how as journalists, how would you see our leaders, the voices of people today, compared to those times back in the day?
Well, one thing when Cronkite covered Vietnam, he famously did a story saying, essentially we're losing the war.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And we were.
the pundits at the time said, when you've lost Walter Cronkite, you've lost America.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, today we have, I believe we show too much deference to our leaders. It was I.F. Stone, I believe, who said all governments lie. And it was Woodward who said, if they've got something real juicy, they're going to cover it up. So we need to be in there slugging away and hammering away every day to get this material out there. We can't just cover the press conferences and what Biden said today and what this agency is doing today. We have to go deep, and that's what I want to encourage every young journalist to do.
I agree wholeheartedly with that in terms of showing too much deference. And also, I mean, I think a good journalist has to have a good BS detector. Okay. You got to have a good, you got to have a good BS detector. I mean, we talked about the journalists of the past and today, and we're going, really far back in terms of a lot of journalists were not formally educated. I think educated now, but one of maybe, you got to have some street smarts too. When somebody's just BSing you and you call them out on that, and not having, because someone has a title elected in a certain position, to show, show respect, but not showing deference, and being able to, willing to call out BS when you see it, and challenge those who are in authority. One of the journalists that I kind of I got to know and had some respect for, but I had lost a little respect when Chris Matthews did a program one time on he's talking about the number of times that he had Trump on his show, and this had nothing to do with the fact that it was Trump. It was just that I think he said something like over his career, like 30 times or something. And I'm like, why? I mean, why would someone who wasn't, regardless of the politics, taking politics aside, but, he was someone who I think was, good copy, a good headline for him. And you had him speaking about things, about something that was not, why were you giving this person this much airtime? And he was that and it was kind of, to me, kind of not being self-aware, because I would not point that out. I had someone who kind of basically was using, and we have to be careful of people who are using the media to further their agenda.
All right, and I guess one last question. I think Fallon, was that you who said something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
I'm on video.
So the Temple News obviously is a hyper local paper, and also covering national issues at the same time. So I was just wondering, during your time at the Temple News, how did you find that you were able to balance both hyper local issues that maybe a lot of the bigger papers and publications didn't cover, that were focused on just the Temple University community or the North Philadelphia community? How are you able to balance that local coverage, but also the important national coverage as well?
Well, we all had beats when I was on the Temple News. We had, I don't know whether it's still set up like that. There were different line editors, and we were responsible for different topics. But when I was at Temple, there were two incidences where one was a graduate student, one was an undergraduate student, who were killed right on the edge of campus. And here you have a story relevant to Temple, but also a city police story, a homicide. And it's, I don't know if it's, I would say in many ways it's instinctive. News is news. And if it is worth reporting, whether it's hyperlocal, like something the journalism department is doing tomorrow, or something big in the city, like I see Height is they're not resuming his contract a year from now for the school district. It's all relevant. And I think news sort of percolates to the top, and you should focus on and write what really is the priority for your community, and not worry about it. It should almost happen, I would think, organically.
Cool. Anything else? Or Rich, related to that question?
Well, I think you're all lucky to be working at the Temple News if you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great tradition. I can't imagine what the people are thinking who founded it 100 years ago right now. None of them are alive, but what they would think, except to have incredible pride in the accomplishments of every generation. And so thank them for starting this tradition.
And I would like to thank you current Temple News students for continuing this newspaper. You really don't, you probably cannot appreciate how much it means to those of us who were on it so many decades ago, that you have followed along with such a great institution. So thank you.
Carrying the torch, guys doing a great job. And, you know, I get reports here about what students are doing, and the paper is doing, and, you know, the awards that are being won, and the type of stories. And I would say just enjoy your time. Continue, main thing, continue to learn. You know, I mean, just continue and enjoy the journey. You know, you'll be graduating, and that's, you know, that'll be soon enough. But enjoy the time while you're in school to learn and do a number of things to develop yourself. But have fun.
Yeah, keep having fun. One last thing is, if anybody needs my email address or wants to contact me personally, I'm open to it, because I think we all stand on the shoulders of others, and we should be willing to help others, and I'm happy to do so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists who joined us today for this amazing discussion. And again, thank everyone for joining us and helping us celebrate this amazing tradition. We obviously have a lot to do still at the Temple News, but just taking a moment to pause and reflect on what we've done and, you know, what we aspire to is always, you know, appreciated and worthwhile. So thank you all. And also I'd like to add that we're having another discussion on Friday with 3 other panelists who will be joining us. So stay tuned for that. But thank all of you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. This was